Right. Only 10 are coming. I mean, is there any interviews happening or anything? I'm just curious. I mean, anything is happening, guys?
Most of the students got placed, only few are left right now. I'm
Oh,
not sure if like, yeah. So
so
that
almost all got
interviews one
placed.
might not be the reason.
Okay. So
At
almost all
least
got
from my
placed.
class. I don't know from other section.
Okay. What about anyone from the other section?
So most have been placed.
Okay. I mean, that's a
Also,
great.
I think this might be because of the ensign preparation because they might have to watch the recordings, right? So probably that's why.
And you have to write, right? So holding a pen and then writing, you might have forgotten. I mean, frankly speaking, coming to a class and then taking a class in a blackboard with the chalk and duster kind of setup, past 1.5 year we have not done, not 1.5. Probably Feb 2020 we did that. Now it is almost 2 years is going to complete. So we are also a little curious how we will go and do that. Anyway, so same thing for you. There is a time limit, 3 hours, and then you have to write the exam. So I'm not sure how, but anyway,
So portions is this full portions and then 70%, 30% split only, na, sir? Like before midsem 30, after midsem 70. That is only, na, sir?
I mean for us,
Uh,
I mean this subject you are asking, I mean I can say
this
roughly
subject, this
that you
subject.
will have more weightage on the later topics, that is as usual, but may not be exactly 70/30, maybe 60/40. I'll keep 60% from the
Okay.
remaining topics and the 40 from the previous topics. But again, I'm not sure
Okay,
about
sir.
this exam time and then I mean duration and maximum marks. Right now, you expect 100 marks in 3 hours. If you are lucky, you may get it this particular course as 60 marks and 2 hours. Less to write.
Also, sir, this is more of lab also, na, sir.
Yes.
Quiz to happen lab anyways. Will it be all written or like we will be like I'm not sure whether we have to execute and submit.
No, no,
Oh,
no, no.
that
No
I can.
execution and other things. The final exam is going to be a completely written exam only. But
Okay.
you will have to write probably the DTD schema or maybe MongoDB code part or
Sure. Like I have a suggestion. Like anyways, we will be writing noise code has to be written everything. Then that is it is better than to have some in the lab, no sir. You will be invigilating. We won't be cheating. But then typing will be easier than writing because there are less chance to miss brackets and stuff, no sir.
I
Uh,
understood that. This time, I'm not very sure how and all, whether we have that kind of flexibility or not. Still, we have
okay.
not gone into that level of discussions. Right now, it's everybody is geared up for getting you people back in the campus. So those arrangements they are doing because it is almost 2 years, nothing is being used. So labs, classrooms, everything is in bad shape. Bad shape in the sense 2 years not used, so so much needs to maintain. So they are in that mode. Maybe next week we will probably start worrying about the other logistics. So anyway, in the department when we discuss, we will try to see how what we can help, what way we can do it. Anyway, that's why I said I didn't even know whether this is going to be a 60 marks exam or a 100 marks exam. All those things needs to be clarified. So right now everybody is focused in finishing up topics and then completing the semester for you guys. So let's see. Anyway, I'll update you next week. We will have better clarity in everything. Okay.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. So we'll continue. So what we were talking is an object is typically associated with three things: variables, messages, and methods. Variables are nothing but attributes of an entity. If I relate that to an RDBMS, attributes of an entity, and messages are, if you remember Java, wherever you have studied, then you have studied about abstract functions or abstract methods or interfaces. Interface contains all abstract methods. So the same concept. Basically, those abstract methods tell you that this particular class contains these methods. How and what to do with that method is up to you. You can define it. But the signature of the method is predefined. Signature of the method in the sense, name of the method, what arguments it takes, what it returns. These things are predefined. So then if you say that these are the 5 methods this particular class is going to have, and somebody implements in their own way, but that is okay. Implementation doesn't matter as long as you stick to this particular signature. So then what happens is, if somebody wanted to use your class for some purpose, say in Java, that is how it works. So much of built-in classes are there, and most of the built-in classes will have interfaces or abstract methods in it. So which means that you either extend the class or you implement an interface, you get those methods. Now, how you implement the methods is not a problem, but this is what the structure of the method. So you can say that is a impression of that particular class or an interface, you can say. So same way, the messages in an object-oriented database for a particular object will define the behavior of that object. Define the behavior in the sense, what can be accessed, what can be modified, what can be updated. These details will be specified by the messages. And we said, typically, if you look into it, these messages are saying that what exactly the response you are going to get for it. Okay. And then there is actual responses you have to build. I mean, these abstract methods only will tell you these are the method signature, but body of the method you need to do. So that is what the methods part in an object does. So body of the code to implement in a message. The method returns a value as the response to the message. So based on the message what you have defined, you need to implement and then return the value what is specified in the message. So that is what methods are doing. Okay. So with these 3 things only you will be able to build an object. And what all attributes you are, or what all variables you are specifying for a message, for an object, you should be having 2 types of messages for each of those variables. One is a read-only method or read-only message, and the other one is update message. Read-only is something like your get methods in Java, and update methods are something like your set methods. So get and set are typically used for reading the values and updating the values. So same way here also it happens. So that is what this particular talks about. And then similar kind of objects, you will club them together. You call them as a class. So then once you have a class, each object is referred as an instance of that class. So basically all the objects will have same variables, same type, and then message interface same, and methods will be same. Okay. Then some examples we have seen. You can see variables and messages are defined. You can define, you can also have methods in that. Some of the messages what you mentioned you may need to implement, then you can write them as separate methods in that. Inheritance, we spoke about it. A specialized behavior of a generalized architecture is what inheritance we normally say. We have a basic class, base class, and then more specialized features you are adding to it. Then we call the new class as a derived class or an inherited class. Okay. So employee and customer are classes inherited from person. So what all variables, messages, and methods defined in the person class will be there in employee and customer by default. In addition to that, if you want to have anything extra, that can also be added. That is what inheritance talks about. And this is just a class hierarchy diagram. So if a question is asked that there is a description given and then you need to draw the class hierarchy, please be careful about the relation. Whichever is the base class you could able to identify. And in the question, they'll not be mentioning that this is the base class. Read the attributes and read the variables and messages. Then you have to identify that this particular class is the base class. These are the child classes, and then next level in the things. So between a base class and a child class, we will say there is an is a relation or is a hierarchy. It is equivalent to the is a hierarchy in the ER model. So you can see customer is a person. It's a single word. The keyword is a single one. Is an a separately you write. You will not be. That is not a valid one. Officer is an employee. Employee is a person. So officer is basically child to child of the person class. So now talking about the same picture, um, full variable list of objects in the class officer, office number, expense account number, those are defined locally. Start date and salary inherited from employee, and name and address inherited from person. So if you look into officer, it is basically inherited from employee. So whatever is there in employee will automatically get. Employee basically inherits from person. So whatever is there in person class, that also will come. So other than the two local variables, what you have defined, you get start date and salary from the employee class, because employee class is your parent class. And employee class also provides name and address, which are not defined locally inside employee, but rather defined in person, which is the base class. Methods inherited similar to variables. Substitutability is any method of a class, say person, can be invoked equally well with any object belonging to any subclass, such as subclass officer or person. What do you understand by that? Say, for example, I have in the base class, I have a method called get salary. Okay. Say, for example, I'm having a method called get salary or something, get address, we'll say. Get address belongs to person class. That is a method available there. Now, employee class also can invoke it. Employee class object also can invoke it. Officer class also can invoke it. Class extent, set of all objects in the class. Okay. Now, there will be two ways to look into it. Class extent of employee includes all officer, teller, and secretary objects, or class extent of employee includes only employee objects that are not in the subclass, such as officer, teller, or secretary. Okay. So you have two ways of extension. One, you can say all the child classes, whoever is there, whatever hierarchical levels it is, all the objects belongs to the class extent. Or the other ways, if you look into it, there is another way of defining it is you say only for the present class. That is, you say employer, then employer class direct objects, which are not part of custom, say officer, teller, and secretary. Okay. So this behavior you have to define in the object-oriented database. Now this is an example of a multiple inheritance. Means multiple inheritance means you are able to inherit from multiple different classes. Say, for example, temporary teller, the last one in the bottom, you can see that is basically inherited from temporary class as well as teller class. So both the features you will be having. In Java, do you have multiple inheritance?
No, sir, not exactly. We had something else, no, sir.
So we
Starts
have
from
Yeah.
what is it?
The concept of interface is
Yeah,
used
interface.
multiple inheritance only. So directly you cannot extend from more than one base class in Java. But in C++ you can do that. You can extend from multiple base classes. So the object-oriented database features the generalized architecture. So in that, actually, multiple inheritance is possible. The class or subclass relationship is represented by a directed acyclic graph. Okay. Remember this term. You may be asked to draw a directed acyclic graph, or a graph will be given and you will have to identify and then write down the class definitions accordingly. Okay. A DAG will be given to you. Attributes associated to each classes, I mean variables of those classes, and messages or methods, whatever information that will also be provided in the picture itself. Now this picture contains only class names. The attributes as well as other things also can be provided. You need to write down the class definition or class hierarchy definition in such cases. Such kind of questions you can expect. Okay. So when multiple inheritance is useful is It is useful when objects can be classified in more than one way, which are independent of each other. Temporary and permanent is independent of officer, secretary, and teller. So officer, secretary, teller is based on the kind of jobs what they perform, and temporary and permanent is kind of job that is being given to them, whether they are temporary employees or permanent employees. Now, in all the three categories of officer, secretary, and teller, you can have these two category of people. So in that case, there are five subclasses are there, but then you have to mix these with each other to form new set of subclasses. That's why we said temporary teller or temporary secretary or permanent officer kind of things. Sometimes what happens is you may not be able to do it that way also. Like you cannot have a subclass between officer and secretary. You cannot be an officer as well as a secretary. So some cases are impossible. So that is leave it. Otherwise, whatever possible, you may require to build those things. A class inherits variables and methods from all its superclasses. There is potential ambiguity when a variable or message n with the same name is inherited from two superclasses A and B. So that is what happens. Suppose if you say get name is available in temporary class as well as teller class, then what happens is both the methods are or both the messages are available to you because you have inherited the temporary class as well as the teller class. Now these two methods, or sorry, these two messages, what you have defined in temporary class and teller class, those two will be available for the temporary teller class. So then when you mention get name, which class get name I should use? Should I use the temporary one or should I use the teller one? So to avoid that, what we will do is we will call them with the name of the class. I hope if you remember, if it is an abstract method, how will you invoke that abstract method? Anyone has an idea? If you have an abstract method in a class, do you have to create an object of that that class so that you can invoke that method?
No,
Guys,
sir,
we are
we extend
Java, right?
that. No, sir, we extend the class and define the abstract method.
Okay. What I'm asking is if it is an abstract method, can I invoke that abstract method directly by calling the class name?
I don't think so, sir. I don't remember
If
as
it is a
such. We
static
will
method, can you do that?
static method we can do. So static
Yes.
objects also in data type also we need not create objects.
Yes, yes. So
I
same
can
way, I mean, in case of an object-oriented programming language, a static method, how it behaves, that is the way how it is going to behave in case of a multiple inheritance in object-oriented database. Slight deviation from the normal scenario. Because till now we were saying that messages are similar to abstract methods. But only in this particular feature, an object-oriented database slightly differs. You have a message and that message belongs to a particular base class. And you have extended that base class into your child class. Similar way, there is another base class you have extended, and both class contains the same function name or same message. You can call them with the name of that class. So suppose A and B both are base classes, which is derived, means from which C is derived, and both A and B contains a function, a message called get name. Then A dot get name and B dot get name you can refer. In a normal object-oriented programming, that is not possible. Only if the method is static, you will be able to refer it with class name, not an abstract method. But in case of object-oriented databases, messages can be invoked this way. This is to avoid the confusion what is there in case of multiple inheritance. Why this difference? Because multiple inheritance is not there in case of Java. Okay. So what I want to mention is initially when we were talking about object-oriented databases, we said there are different object-oriented databases which are developed using different types of object-oriented programming languages. There are certain object-oriented databases like IDB, for an example, is completely developed using C++. So in that case, IDB has multiple inheritance IDB has the ways to refer messages this way and all those things. Whereas object DB is there, object database. That is an object-oriented database which is developed using, partially using Java, and there are some C routines they have used. So since the base framework is Java, the concept of multiple inheritance itself is not there. Different ways, again, you have to do that. You will have something similar to a case of an interface in database also you can see. In that case, since multiple inheritance is not there, this particular scenario will not come, or you can not refer a message from a particular class with class name dot that. You need to go with the standard procedure of creating an object and object name dot message name. You have to use it. Okay, so keep that in mind. It is not a generalized scenario what I am talking about it. Most of the object-oriented databases, whatever is object-oriented databases are not so popular, I have to say. Not like Oracle or similar kind of RDBMS or NoSQL databases. Object-oriented databases are largely used in research purposes as well as some kind of scientific analysis. So they are not very popular, but at the same point of time, whatever databases came out till now, most of them are built around C++. Only one or two which I could able to understand is from developed using Java. Otherwise, 6 or 7 databases which is openly available are developed using C++. So they all of them goes with multiple inheritance and this format and other things. But there are different cases also. So what I'm saying is this particular point about multiple inheritance, this slide is not completely applicable to all the object-oriented databases. And these slides are mainly with respect to IDB. Okay. Multiple inheritance, we leave it. We will talk about object identity. Now, when you talk about a table in an RDBMS, you have a unique way of identifying a tuple in a table. You have the concept of primary key. Now, similar to that, when you have objects in your database, similar to a tuple is what an object I have to say, or little more. So now this each individual object, how will I identify? If you remember, in MongoDB, you have a by default identifier which used to be used to uniquely identify a document in a MongoDB collection, right? What is the field name?
ID only, sir, underscore ID.
Yeah. So similar way, an object identifier or an object identity is something what an object-oriented databases uses to uniquely identify an object. This is something different from a typical object-oriented programming language. There, what we use is name of the object itself. So name of the object should be unique and be called every time with the name of the object. But here in case of object-oriented databases, that unique identification mechanism what we use is an object identity. It contains a value part, a data value. I can say the primary key corresponding to a primary key in an RDBMS kind of structure, and a name also that for that object identifier. Normally, say for example, IDB, it uses whatever name of the object you used to create that object. Like you need to create a new instance, you will use new operator to create an object. It will create memory as well as initialize values. So same way, a name at that point of time, whatever I am giving, that is what is the same for the object identity also. That means whatever name of the object I have given, the same thing will be taken as the value for name field in the object identity. Value part, different object-oriented databases uses different schemes. IDB, I will say, it uses an 8-character or it's an alphanumeric string what gets generated by itself by the database, and that is assigned to it. So that 8-character alphanumeric string will be unique with respect to all the objects in the database. And if you look into IDB implementation, it never repeats that number. That means it keeps using new numbers until it reaches the complete combinations. When you have an 8 character alphanumeric combinations, you can think about how many combinations you can make. Now it reaches to that level, then only it will restart from the first combinations what you can think of it. So IDB implementation is that way. The algorithm what they use to build this or generate this object identity value is generated like that. So that is one part, name, and then any other features if you want to attach to that. That means that object, some of the objects are read-only objects alone. I mean, you can generate it, you can keep it, you can access it, you cannot modify it. So if whether that kind of properties are there, that will also be attached. Okay, so 3 things you will be having with an object identity. No 2 objects have the same identifier. Each object has only one object identifier. Can be stored as a field of an object so that you can refer. Can be system generated or external. That means, again, this external option is not with an IDB kind of a database. We were talking about object database, like another variation of object-oriented database that has a mechanisms to assign by external. I mean, like a user can assign an object identifier part. Otherwise, mostly system generated. Now we have seen is a relation in terms of, I mean, when we were talking about inheritance, when we were talking about inheritance, we have seen a similar kind of a diagram. We call it as a directed acyclic graph representation. That DAG representation was talking about is a relation. Okay. Now that was with respect to inheritance. Now, similar way, there what we are talking about is in terms of classes, and the class contains variables and messages which can be inherited to new classes and other things. Now, this I'm talking about in terms of object. Okay, that means, see, if you see the example, you will understand it. I have an object called rim. I have another object tire, cable, lever, or pad, different objects. Okay. Now, lever, pad, and cable, these 3 objects put together, I mean, whatever features each of these objects have got, if you combine them together, then you can form a super class or an object which will be providing a specific functionality. Okay. Now, in real world, if you are seeing, think about these are the parts of a bicycle. Okay. So wheel, brake, gear, and frame for basic components what you require. And if you look into the brake part, it requires a lever, it requires a pad, and it requires a cable. Okay. The lever what you press and hold, and the pad is the one which is getting jammed with the wheel part so that cycle will slow down, and the cable is the one which is controlling the movement between lever and pad. Okay, so these 3 parts are required. So which means that if I look from top, bicycle, if I take as an example, brake is one component of it. Now brake I can further divide into 3 more subcomponents. Now think about in terms of objects. I have lever, pad, and cable as objects. These 3 objects put together, I can get another object called brake to provide a specific functionality. So this way, if you are representing objects, that is referred as object containment or containment hierarchy. Now, this containment hierarchy also can be represented using a directed acyclic graph. And in that graph, the relation what we are talking about is not is a relation, rather is part of relation. Okay. So please keep these two things separate. Why? Because you may be asked to draw a DAG for class hierarchy representation in one scenario, or a DAG of a class hierarchy representations will be given. You need to write down the class hierarchy. That can be one thing. The other one will be, you will be given a containment hierarchy or object containment representation using a DAG. At that point of time, the relation between these are not in terms of classes, rather in terms of instances or objects. And these objects can form to create a composite object. Okay. So object containment and class hierarchy representations look similar. Both uses directed acyclic graph, but when you are writing down its representation in terms of a class model or a schema or something, that will differ. And the relation between two parts of an object containment is part of, whereas in class hierarchy, it is A. That is, class B is a extended version of class A. Okay. Just one part, I mean, like one concept I will introduce, and then we will leave it. We will talk about the second part in this slide, that is persistent programming languages, in the next session. So what this talks about is, we said object-oriented database are designed with the thought that objects can be directly stored into databases rather than storing them in the primary memory during the execution of a program. You're able to now store the objects permanently into a storage structure and then use it. That is the whole idea of object-oriented databases. Now, when you develop an object-oriented database, the whole object-oriented programming framework, what we can think about, C++, Smalltalk, or C# or Java, any of them doesn't thought about persistent object. Persistent object means permanent store, I mean objects which has permanent storage facility. Okay. For an example, in Java, there is something called garbage collector. That means if you are not using an object, you created an object or a variable, and then you are not using for a specific amount of time, the garbage collector functionality in Java will clear that memory. That means free that memory and then put it into the heap back. That means you can reallocate that memory for some other purpose. That means the garbage collector will basically destroy the object. Now, that was required in Java because that is one beautiful memory management technique what Java introduces. In C or C++, which you can't find, Java has brought in to optimize the memory usage, especially when you have so many objects in your program. This will easily manage the memory in a beautiful way. So that is what we were doing. So the whole thought process was, I don't require it in a permanent storage fashion. Now, object-oriented database is just the other side. They say, no, we want that objects to be permanently stored. So when you talk about permanent storage, you need to have a mechanism of moving it from primary to secondary. Till now, all these object-oriented programming languages were thinking about bringing some content from the secondary, modify it or work around it, and they just erased at the end of the program. Now what happens is, first part is same, bringing something from the secondary to the primary. But after processing it, you are going to bring this back to the secondary memory. Your modified object has to go back to the secondary memory. That part of implementation is not there in an object-oriented programming language. So which means that if you have to use an object-oriented database, the existing object-oriented programming language, what you are using to build your application, needs to have one extension which can bring in this permanent storage management or persistent storage. So to add this persistent programming languages as next category of languages, it's not something new like SQL where you need to have a lot of interactions and you need to have a bridge and all those things, but rather it's just an extension to the object-oriented programming concepts called persistent programming languages has been brought into picture so that you can add those features to your existing programming languages so that you can operate directly to the object-oriented database. Say, for example, IDB I am using as my object-oriented database. I can write my application using C++. Now C++ doesn't have this persistent storage mechanism. So an extension of library called persistent programming language for IDB is available, which you have to install into your framework, and you can then directly call them, use them as normal C++ functions, and then work around with that. So that part, there are some more details you have to talk about persistent programming languages. What exactly is different from regular object-oriented programming language, that we have to discuss. Here is one part. This is purely object-oriented database and object-oriented programming language. Now, another way to look at it is, rather than doing this extra thing, I already have a relational DBMS available. So put this object into a relational DBMS and bring it back. Then you have the existing ODBC connectivity, SQL systems, everything is in place. What you are doing now is you are running on top of an RDBMS, an object-oriented database. That way also you can build an object-oriented database. That is referred as object relational systems. So we need to talk about a little bit about these two categories, and then you can wind up object-oriented database definition, introduction. And then we will have one session on IDB, talking about how exactly IDB can define. It's all same like C++ notations or Java notations. Don't worry too much. We can wind up that. Okay. So today I'm winding up at this level. We'll continue with respect to object relational systems and persistent programming languages in the next class. I have provided the link to upload the schema or design documents. Please do that by end of Sunday. And then I will let you know what is the next and what you are supposed to prepare for your final presentations and report part. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.